So in 2005, the FPS genre was in a really interesting transitional period. Like we were moving past the classic boomer shooters and starting to see games experiment with advanced physics, dynamic lighting, and cinematic storytelling, and enter Monolith Productions. These guys were no strangers to making great games, having worked on titles like No One Lives Forever, but what they wanted to do with F.E.A.R was entirely different. They wanted to create a game that was equal parts an adrenaline-pumping action movie and a deeply unsettling psychological horror. To be honest, blending those two genres sounds like a complete nightmare on paper. I mean, how do you make the player feel terrified and vulnerable while simultaneously giving them an arsenal of devastating weapons and super soldier reflexes? Well, somehow Monolith pulled it off, and they did it by creating an atmosphere that absolutely suffocates you. And the story drops you into the boots of a point man for the F.E.A.R team, which is a classified special forces unit tasked with dealing with paranormal threats. Your mission is to stop a guy named Paxton Fettel, a telepathic commander who has taken control of an army of cloned super soldiers known as replica forces. And right at the center of all this chaos is a mysterious, terrifying little girl named Alma, who's tied to the Armacam Technology Corporation. That's all I'm gonna say about the plot, because discovering the horrific secrets of what Armacam was actually doing is part of the fun. The narrative deals heavily with corporate hubris, government overreach, and some seriously freaky scientific experimentation. But what really sets the OG F.E.A.R apart is where it drew its inspirations. While a lot of horror games at the time were looking at Western slasher films or zombie tropes, Monolith looked eastward. It's actually influenced by Asian horror cinema, specifically iconic films like Ringu and Dark Water, which means the game doesn't just rely on a monster jumping out a closet and yelling boo. Instead, it conditions you through silence, isolation, and anticipation. You'll be walking down a flickering office hallway, and you'll see a pool of dark water slowly creeping toward you, or a shadow that doesn't belong to you. And there's this constant tingling sound and music design playing in the background that makes you feel paranoid, like you're just waiting for something to happen. The horror isn't always direct. It's the slow realization of what was done to Alma and how she's just a child who had everything taken from her. It's incredibly unsettling.
Watch out, grenade!
But here's the kicker. When the horror briefly pauses, F.E.A.R transforms into one of the most incredibly satisfying, chaotic, and brutal first-person shooters ever made. I'm not exaggerating when I say that the gunplay in this game still puts a lot of modern shooters to shame. The core mechanic that makes this all work is reflex time, which is basically bullet time. You can slow down the world around you, allowing you to dodge incoming fire, line up headshots, and completely dominate a room of highly trained soldiers. And it's not just a gimmick, the game is actually balanced around it. On higher difficulties, the replica soldiers are lethal, and if you aren't using your slow-mo, you're gonna get shredded. The combat is just pure chaos. And the particle effects? Oh man. When a firefight breaks, the environment reacts in a way that's still amazing today. You throw a grenade, pop into slow-mo, and watch as the explosion sends shockwaves through the air. And you aren't just shooting guys in a static room, you're physically tearing the environment apart with your firepower. And you have these crazy melee moves too. Like you can do slide kicks and drop kicks that send enemies flying across the room. To be honest, the only other game that really comes to mind that captures this specific raw action and straight-up shooting vibe is the Max Payne series. Now, all of this amazing combat and weaponry wouldn't mean a thing if the enemies were just dumb. And this brings us to the true achievement of the OG F.E.A.R, the enemy AI. Even today, decades later, people still talk about the AI in this game with absolute reverence. When you play on harder difficulties, it genuinely feels like you're fighting other human players. No two gunfights ever feel the same. So how did Monolith do it? Well, back in the early 2000s, most games used something called a finite state machine, or FSM, to control enemy behavior. Basically, devs would write a massive list of hard-coded rules. If the player is far away, run to cover. If the player is close, shoot. Games like Half-Life had incredibly complex FSMs with over 80 unique states, But Monolith decided to try something revolutionary called Goal-Oriented Action Planning, or GOAP. Instead of scripting what the enemy should do, the game gives the AI a goal like kill the player and a bunch of possible actions, and then lets the AI create its own plan to achieve that goal based on the environment. This also then changed how the levels were designed. The designers didn't have to painstakingly script where every enemy should stand. They just built interesting spaces with multiple flanking routes and dropped the AI into it. But there's a really cool secret to why the AI feels so human-like, and it has to do with the audio design. The AI is constantly communicating with each other using a system of voice lines called barks. The AI keeps a track of everything, and they broadcast their internal calculations as dialogue. For example, if you shoot a guy, another enemy won't just stand there. He will yell, "What's your status?" And the injured guy will reply, "I'm hit." This tells you that you successfully landed a shot, while making the enemies feel like a real squad. As it was a massive hit, naturally it got some expansions. Now these expansions, Extraction Point in 2006 and Perseus Mandate in 2007, are in a bit of a weird spot because they were developed by Timegate Studios, not Monolith. When Monolith eventually made the true sequel, they completely ignored the storylines of these expansions, making them non-canon. But if you're a fan of the first game, you absolutely have to play them, especially Extraction Point. It picks up right after the first game, adds some new weapons and enemies, and maintains that same oppressive atmosphere and incredible gunplay. There's a shootout right at the start of the expansion in a church and funeral home that's honestly one of the best combat encounters in the entire franchise. And if you buy the game today, you usually get both expansions bundled in for free, which is an absolute steal.
God, I hope you're wrong.
This brings us to 2009 and the sequel, F.E.A.R 2 Project Origin, and the gaming landscape then had shifted dramatically. We were deep into the Xbox 360 and PS3 generation, and military shooters like Call of Duty were setting the rules for how a first-person shooter should play. Monolith was back at the helm, and you can really feel them trying to modernize the franchise to fit these new standards. The result is a game that is highly polished, fun, but noticeably homogenized and arguably a step back in several key areas. Let's start with the gameplay. It had mechanics that are standard today, like aiming down sights and sprinting, and while this makes the game feel more modern, it completely changes the pacing. The hip firing of the first game is replaced with a more grounded cover-to-cover style of shooting. The environments opened up massively. Instead of endless grey office corridors, you're fighting through urban streets, destroyed schools, and other outdoor areas. The game looks nicer, with better graphics and environments. They didn't shy away from blood, and there are more enemy types to fight. They also added vehicular combat, specifically these massive elite-powered armor mechs that you can climb into. After spending hours on foot, jumping into one of these power suits and unleashing a tremendous amount of firepower on the replica forces is a huge power trip. But while that's fun, it kinda highlights the issue with F.E.A.R 2. It leaned way too far into the action and lost a lot of the horror. The gunplay also took a weird hit. The controls and the shooting feedback just aren't as punchy as the first game. The gun sounds are a bit wimpy, the enemy hit reactions are toned down, and that over-the-top red mist gore system from the first game was significantly reduced. It's still a solid shooter, bordering on great at times, but it lacks that raw, visceral impact. And then there's the AI. Oh man, the AI. Remember all that incredible AI stuff we just talked about? Well, whether it was due to the open level design or the shift to console limitations, the AI here feels like a massive downgrade. The enemies get really repetitive. They all seem to have the exact same strategy: run to a piece of cover and just spray bullets at you. They lack the dynamic flanking and aggressive hunting of the original. They fall for stupid tricks, they're slow on the draw, and for some reason, they absolutely love running towards grenades. Once you figure out their basic patterns, combining your bullet time with some decent aim makes most encounters a breeze. And the approach to horror also fundamentally changed. F.E.A.R 1 was about dread and isolation. F.E.A.R 2 is about in-your-face haunted house-style jump scares. Alma shows up constantly. She's no longer this subtle, terrifying presence in the corner of your eye. She's grabbing you and throwing you around all the time. The game overuses its scares to the point where they become predictable. You can almost sense exactly when a jump scare is coming because the game telegraphs it so heavily. There's still some great creepy moments, and the sound design and music do a good job of building chaos, but it feels a bit cheap compared to the masterclass of the original. Now, if F.E.A.R 2 was a gentle step towards the mainstream, F.E.A.R 3 was a full-on sprint. Released in 2011, development was completely taken away from Monolith and handed over to Day One Studios, who had to wrap up the storyline while competing right in the middle of the absolute peak of the COD craze. And boy, does it show. If you go into F.E.A.R 3 expecting a psychological horror game, you're gonna be profoundly disappointed. It was stripped of almost everything that made F.E.A.R unique in favor of making it an arcadey co-op action shooter. Let's just rip the band-aid off. The horror is completely gone. The plot is a borderline incoherent mess where you play as some point man trying to get to Alma, who is now magically pregnant. But the game is designed entirely around co-op. When you're wandering through brightly lit hallways with a buddy on voice chat, constantly cracking jokes, it's impossible to feel scared. It also fully adopted modern military shooter tropes. You're restricted to a 2-weapon limit, your health regenerates automatically, and there's a magnetic, sticky cover system. The weapons lost a lot of their personality, with little recoil and no beefy sound effects. But here's the twist. Once you accept that F.E.A.R 3 is a terrible horror game, you realize it's actually a kind of fun, highly unique co-op shooter. One player controls the point man, who plays like a standard FPS hero with guns and the classic slow-mo ability. The other player controls his dead psycho brother, Paxton Fettel. Fettel doesn't use guns. Instead, he shoots energy blasts from his hands, uses telekinesis to lift enemies into the air, and most importantly, he can possess the bodies of enemy soldiers. The point system, while terrible for horror, is actually a great mechanic for an action game. By doing menial and unique tasks, like using special powers and securing kills, you earn points that are combined on your main profile to unlock permanent upgrades and special powers based on your progress. It gives you a reason to keep playing and chasing high scores. And I have to give major props to the multiplayer in F.E.A.R 3. Instead of just doing standard deathmatch, they created 4 incredibly unique modes designed around the themes of the franchise. First, you have Contractions, which plays a lot like Call of Duty Zombies. Then there's Fucking Run, which is exactly what it sounds like. The multiplayer is genuinely stellar, and the point system ties all of these modes together perfectly.
It's this way!
So what's the ultimate legacy of the F.E.A.R franchise? Well, it's a bit of a tragic story, to be honest. After F.E.A.R 3, there was a brief attempt to make a free-to-play shooter called F.E.A.R Online, but it was incredibly short-lived and shut down after less than a year. And since then, nothing. I don't think the world needs another average military shooter, but we absolutely need more master-crafted, author-driven experiences like the original F.E.A.R. If you have never played these games, or if you're just a spooky shooter fan looking for something to play this Halloween, I can't recommend them enough. If you made it this far, type F.E.A.R forever in the comments to let me know you don't have a fried TikTok brain. It really makes my day. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit the like button, subscribe if you think I'm good enough, and catch you in the next one.